This is unprecedented.
A phenomenon that challenges the social norm.
I've never seen anything like this.
A spectacle that brings people together while taking the world by storm.
If you are told to evacuate, make sure that you seek shelter.
They say lightning never strikes twice. Ah, it. Who are we kidding?
Let's go kill some sharks!
You asked interrogator questions around my face. It's gone.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
That is not paid for by them. That is paid for by the people of Detroit.
You might be qualified, ML.
I'm not qualified for this job.
Let me tell you something. You want to go right now? Okay? You want to go right now?
Hey kids, it's your old pal ML Elric back with a special edition of ML Soul of Detroit. Now, normally our editions are pretty special, but if you're watching us on YouTube, you see we have a new graphic. We had our intro built on a famous hurricane, the one from Sharknado, but here we're talking about something a little more serious. That's Hurricane Katrina with Pulitzer Prize winner Sheri Fink, who's the author of 5 Days of Memorial, which was recently turned into an 8-part series, 5 Days of Memorial, on Apple TV. Is it Apple TV Plus?
Yes.
Because I just saw an ad for Hulu where they said, we don't know.
Don't talk about the competition.
Our new service is going to be Hulu TV Plus Plus Plus, and I can't keep up with all the superlatives, but it's a fantastic show, and I have not finished watching this series. I finished watching episode 5 last night, and I had to turn it off because my wife was crying because she was so moved by not just the situation, but how compelling it's been recounted in a series that, from what I understand, seems to be pretty true to the book, looking at the 5 days where people were trapped in Memorial Hospital in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina, some of the life and death decisions that were made, and then it transitions into the investigation into whether or not these doctors violated the Hippocratic Oath and several laws of the state of Maine and Louisiana, which don't always line up perfectly. So, Sheri, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on your podcast, ML.
Well, we appreciate it. And our show is brought to you by Hall Financial and Luke Nowacki with Pinnacle Wealth Strategy. We're going to talk a little bit about them in a minute. But I have to tell Sheri a fun fact about how far back our families go. Herschel Fink is her father, who is the lawyer for the Detroit Free Press. Everybody knows that. But I didn't find out until several years ago that our families intersected years before, because Herschel's had to defend me and other people at the Free Press. But the first time our families met, he was suing my dad because my dad had a lingerie shop called Precious Moments Lingerie. What? And Herschel was representing Precious Moments figurines who thought their treacly little bits of ceramic may somehow be diminished by being associated with the teddies and garters and various devices that my dad was peddling after he retired from the police department. So
this explains a lot.
Yeah. So, let's put all that in the past, Sheri. Let's start. Let's start fresh.
I did not know that, and I'm so honored, especially honored that you would have me on your podcast after such a history.
Well, I don't know if my old man ever paid the settlements. I'm hoping you'll put a word in for me back home. But yeah, so that's where we started, and weird. Somehow we've ended up here.
Okay.
Very good. Wow. An origin story.
The series is fantastic. I was telling you off the air, one of the things that makes it so good are the ethical questions, because 45 people died in this hospital, correct? It was 45?
Well, there were 45 bodies found after the when the disaster mortuary teams came in, and I think ultimately about 5 of those had died like just before the hurricane. So like 40 people in the space of the storm and then the aftermath.
Now, watching the series, and you've talked to people in your research for the book. 2 doctors specifically told you that, yeah, we euthanized them, correct?
It's interesting. They actually didn't use that word, and that word, the book actually goes into the history of what is euthanasia. And I guess to make a long story short, euthanasia means good death. And generally anywhere in the world that does allow it, which is obviously very controversial for health providers who are dedicated and take a sacred oath to protect life, to cross that line. But in the places where it is allowed, it is with patient consent. And whatever you think of what happens in this case, the facts matter, and the facts are that these patients, as far as we know, were not consulted. So the doctors who told me, they basically said they intentionally hastened the deaths of their patients by giving them drugs. 2 doctors did tell me that.
It's hard to not have an opinion or put yourself in the shoes. And that's what's good about it. The protagonist and the antagonist are very, you have a lot of feeling for both of them. You understand why people did what they did, but then you sit and watch and go, yeah, from my couch, that's an easy decision. Put these people out of their misery. But then I always figure, well, yeah, if that was me, I'd be injected with these medications and the cavalry would arrive. And so I don't know what to make of it, who was right and who was wrong in administering these medications.
Why are you looking at me? Do you two want to euthanize me?
Kind of, sometimes.
We do. We just don't want to go through the counseling.
I want to get life into you.
Oh, okay.
I want to get you going. But has that been the reaction to the book and to the show, that everyone's like, yeah, I would do it, or no, I wouldn't do it? And I wonder what most people fall on, what side.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. Well, I mean, for viewers or listeners who don't know the story, basically, this was a hospital that was surrounded by floodwaters after the levees broke, after Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005. And like we're hearing now with the Hurricane Ian and the aftermath, these hospitals were not particularly well prepared to have things like, the running water failed, power failed, backup power was about to fail and ultimately did fail. And so the book and then the series is a dramatic adaptation. So the book is nonfiction, but the series is based on it. And it kind of reconstructs those 5 days in the hospital as the conditions worsened, and it puts you in the center as the viewer. And the goal of that is so that you kind of walk along and you have empathy for what's happening and for the suffering and the difficult dilemmas and the choices about, helicopters are coming. So who do you rescue first? How do you decide who to move out of this place? And thinking about those types of issues. And I would say that the response to the series and the response to the book have been similar in that you see that viewers really are debating, or they're taking very strong opinions on one side or another about this question of what to do with the patients who at some point, some physicians and nurses felt could not be saved. And like one of you said, that's like up for debate. And one of the things I've learned, I'm actually a doctor by training, became a journalist, but did a lot of disaster relief work and relief work in war zones. And you find that a really important aspect of this concept called triage, yeah. That word you hear when you go to a hospital, like which patient goes into the hospital first, gets seen first in an ER. But this same kind of sorting can happen in an emergency. And there are sort of all different ways to do this. And the important thing is that resources can change. And so if you are sort of committing to an irreversible choice, that is somewhat a dangerous thing, because then you might suddenly have the helicopters arrive, as in this situation. So, but the point is to make people think. It's not so much to look back and judge those people as to make us feel like we really don't want this to happen again, no matter where we stand on some of these difficult ethical dilemmas.
Well, one of the things that I think people should understand is, while this is a very compelling series, and it's very well done, the book is also outstanding. It was named one of New York Times 10 best books in the year it was published, and it's staggering the work that went into it. If you think about as a reporter, trying to recreate a situation, you're now going into a situation where everybody involved doesn't want to talk to you, where many of the people are either dead or trying to recover from the trauma they went through or are still grieving, where people may not live where they used to live because their neighborhoods were completely and utterly wiped out, where everybody's lawyered up, where people have been prosecuted. I mean, it's an incredibly daunting challenge. And Sheri spoke to over 500 people, and it's an amazing story. I don't know how they boiled it down. And I know from just talking to Herschel that at one time it was being optioned as a movie, and now it's 8 parts. I wonder, when you look at that book and you think about how do we get all this good stuff in under, like Spartacus length movie, are you happy that it's a television presentation now as opposed to an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, a box of popcorn, and oh my God, they left so many good things out? Because I'm sure they still did leave many amazing things out, but...
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. And first of all, ML, because you're an amazing journalist, you totally understand the kinds of challenges of telling a story like this in terms of getting people to, or just trying to figure out who would be able to speak and why they might want to speak about this and help others understand such a difficult, traumatic situation. So having the length of time to work on it as a book, which was many years, I think that actually worked in the favor of some people who weren't initially able to talk, ultimately did speak once all the legal issues were cleared up. There were civil and criminal cases that followed, and that's one interesting thing you get to follow in the series is that process. But certainly, I think, when the book came out was 2013, and this format of like a limited TV series, a limited dramatic series, I don't know if it even existed. And so I remember when there was an initial plan and hope to make it into a movie, and wonderful people working on that too. It didn't ultimately work out, but yeah, it was sort of like triage. You had to decide which parts to cut and which parts to keep. And Apple just did an amazing amazing support of this project. So you can see it's just incredible the realistic way that the hospital was depicted. The art department and the production designers were just brilliant. They worked off of materials that I had collected over the years, and it's like the spitting image of the hospital, so seamless. They were even able to use archival and kind of weave it in. And then the two people who created it, produced it, 2 of the 3 directors, and wrote it. These 2 people, John Ridley and Carlton Cuse, were just absolutely amazing. And then Wendy Stansler, also a brilliant director, directed some of the episodes, and the cast. And they all really honor the fact that these were real people, even though it's it's a dramatic series. Certain things are changed in it, but there was an abiding respect for the fact that this was, a national tragedy, a national trauma, and a trauma for the people who went through it.
There's been a lot of these limited series that are based on nonfiction books. And I don't know how common it is. I felt like it wasn't that common that the actual author of the book became a producer. Is that something, when this is getting shopped around, that you wanted to be a producer to honor the book, or did they want you because you just have the most insight on the story?
I don't know about their feeling, but I can say I feel very lucky that it landed here. I mean, that was part of it. I remember early on being told you don't have so much control when you give this over to the people who know how to make TV. I don't know how to make TV, but the one thing you can do is choose the people you entrust it with. And when I spoke with John and Carlton early on, and they were encyclopedic into the book, and they welcomed the idea of my participation. And so, yeah, I felt very protective, especially of the real people who were involved. And just, that was like the main aim, was to try to ensure that that it honored the real situation, that any sort of dramatic liberties that were taken didn't in any ways, compromise I would say the integrity of it, or, put people in a bad light. And they did nothing like that. That was very much, I just received the nicest note from a person yesterday who is depicted in the series, somebody who's been very private and, went through a very difficult time, just talking about that it was incredibly healing for this person to watch it with their family. And so that made me feel very happy, because I think that was one of the things that I was most concerned about.
Sheri, how did you get involved with this story? How did it kind of come about, and what made you decide you want to turn it into a book?
I was a responder to Katrina, actually. At that time, I was still doing humanitarian aid work overseas, and then this huge disaster hit my own country. I think I was coming back to the U.S. like that week that Katrina hit, and so I volunteered in the shelters, and I'd just written a book about a war hospital, so happy subjects. But there's a theme here, and having trained as a doctor, and when you learn to write, you're told write what you know. So this, it hit the news. There was a very, at the time, it was like a big story that there were rumors that something had happened at this one hospital. And of course, there were many hospitals in a similar kind of situation, surrounded by water, waiting days for rescue, power going out. But at this one hospital, so many bodies were found. And very early on, some of the staff who were there said something happened that shouldn't have happened. So I know it's like easy for us to sort of sit back in our comfortable chairs and draw judgments about what happened. But in fact, the people at that hospital who have a right to have an opinion about it, because they were there too, they split on the question of what was right to do.
I was watching a news report, I think it was from a New Orleans TV station, when the series was coming out, and it was basically, there's a lot of raw feeling still 17 years later about how it's going to be presented. Almost, I guess that's to be expected. You want to protect, Memorial and what it is now. Have you heard that kind of feedback? And I know you interviewed Dr. Poe for the book. Have you heard anything about her thoughts regarding the miniseries coming out and reliving all this again?
Yeah, I mean that TV piece came out before the series, so nobody had watched it.
People always complain before they watch something now. We know that. So.
Yeah, but I think it's understandable. These are really difficult events to live through. And I remember when 9/11, when the anniversary, I live in New York and have for many years. And when that 20th anniversary was coming up, I felt like, it's all over the TV. All these series are coming out. And for a while, I felt like I couldn't look at it. And then suddenly something changed, and I actually did watch some things, and it helped me process things. So I think everybody's different is the point. And I wouldn't judge anybody for not wanting to watch this if they themselves had gone through it. I've always felt like it's really important for people, the larger, the rest of us, to see what happened, to grapple with it. And it helps us be better citizens. I mean, look at what we're seeing now in terms of the hurricanes, the stress, that thousands of evacuations of medically fragile people. We need to do better. And these issues have not been resolved. And so, that is the larger aim of telling a story like this. It is a really important story. It's, important piece of what happened with Katrina, but it tells a larger story of, who we as voters, we as individuals, what can we do to make our families more prepared, ourselves more prepared? I saw people posting who had watched the series and said, I'm evacuating. So if it could have that effect, if it can teach us about, teach is perhaps the wrong word, because it's also a really gripping watch. But if it can inform us, if it can inspire us, if it can enrage us and make us want to make changes that could protect human life, I think, and lessen suffering, then that is the goal. So, and as far as the Dr. Poe, she's one of the doctors who was at the center of the allegations. She injected some patients. She was arrested later by the Attorney General. You can see the details in the series, but she's always maintained that she was innocent of what she was charged with. So not one of the two doctors who told me that they intentionally hastened death. This is another doctor. And she has just always, stated that she does not watch the news. She does not watch. So I think there was a statement that she would not be watching this, that she wasn't involved in making it. And that's all I know.
Well, she'll be watching it vicariously, because there's no way that people who know her are not telling her what it was like, or that she can resist the urge to say, okay, how did I come out? And that's just human nature. My only complaint about the series is it's taken away the thing that I'm always able to say when I'm watching something incredibly moving with people, where I'm like, it's not real. Don't get so upset. This is all made up. This is Hollywood, but this isn't. In fact, some of the people, it's their real names, and I found that kind of extraordinary, because often when you see these things, there's composite characters, 4 people congeal into one, and then they have some name, and it's usually some sort of corny name, like my name is
Elric.
Angel Pagan or something. It's like, oh, is he an angel or is he a devil? But it's the nurse that cares about everybody, and this is really real. It's in fact, I can't wait to see the end of it, because it's just pivoted for me to the point where one of the doctors, who starts off being I think sort of a very sympathetic and very compelling character, is just about to end up in the crosshairs. But before we get to that, I have to ask you, because you are a doctor, and because I'm sure your dad is watching on YouTube, as we encourage everybody to watch us on YouTube channel, ML Elric. And somebody's posted.
I heard you tried to put him up to surprising me.
No, I invited him to sit in. I didn't know that we'd be able to keep him quiet. That's the problem. And he knows himself pretty well. And he said, I don't know that I should probably do that. And I said, I always defer to counsel on these matters. So I think he's watching. But somebody has posted, who's Herschel Fink? So we're going to have to straighten that guy out later.
Google it, yeah.
But this is a Herschel question, because somebody had a daughter who became a doctor and must have been very proud. And then they said, I want to be a reporter. And was there anybody who said, you've got this all backwards?
He only has himself to blame, because my dad was a reporter before he became the lawyer for the Free Press. He was a reporter for the Detroit News, and and then his passion for the First Amendment led him to law school. I was growing up, and so I grew up around going with him downtown to news meetings and to his classes where he taught media law at Wayne State University, and so I've always been, just like the importance of the media, of journalism as a cornerstone of our democracy was just like in my DNA. It was around the dinner table discussions. So ultimately, my passion for writing and for communicating and journalism, took me in this weird direction. But yes, it was a a difficult conversation, probably, as I made that transition after having gone through so much schooling for another career. I think honestly, it was harder for my mom, who had passed away a number of years ago. But even she ultimately, I think, came to terms with it. My dad has always loved journalism. I think he could totally relate to why this felt important, communicating that passion of medicine and trying to help others kind of appreciate it as well. And then going back to something else you said just earlier, I want to say, in terms of the real people, there are some composite characters. The series, obviously, it's a dramatic series. It's based on the book. It's not exact. I hope people will, who are interested will read the book and get more details of what really happened. But in terms of the people whose names were used, and, they had been in articles, and the book has been out for many years, their names were out there, but what's been quite striking is that the actors who embodied the characters based on the real people were incredible advocates for them, and that's not only on screen but actually privately as well. And they've talked about some of that in their interviews, which I've watched some of them being interviewed. And so I think that really comes through, because the portrayals are so empathetic, and it's really not one of those series where there's a good guy and a bad guy.
There's no one to really hate in this. You just feel bad for everybody. Just some decisions are in question. Sorry, Emma.
Yeah, and I think you can have a lot of empathy for people, and you can still say, you know what, that is not what we want to see happening. Or, there were other options. Like they there were other options besides the one that was chosen. And we know that from other hospitals where the same events did not take place. So I think you can both empathize and also see a way toward perhaps this not happening again. And the big thing that's striking me, as I revisit this 10 years after the book, 9 years after the book, is just the vulnerable people are the vulnerable people for all of these crises. It's like when we're in a pinch and when we're going through a pandemic or a hurricane, who is it who's suffering? Who is it who's dying? And it's the people, the same groups of people, and the people who are not being valued as they should be. And hopefully through the series, you see the value of a man, for example, a patient who can't walk. He's had a spinal cord stroke, but he, that's just one aspect of him. And so his life has so much value, and that is across the board. So if I have one takeaway, it's like we need to do better at involving, people with disabilities, for example, like this man, who are, very creative in their daily lives, adapting to challenges. Like those are the people who should be at the center of how we prepare for disasters, and their lives need to be prioritized as well. So I'm just like blown away. Why don't we have a way to get somebody down 8 flights of stairs who is obese and can't walk? Like that's a lot of people in this country. If there's a hurricane and the power goes out, like why don't we have ways to do that? We need to have ways to do that. It's astonishing that people are dying for these types of reasons.
And when that really showed in the series with Emmett, Emmett Everett, and I ended up going, because of the Google machine, doing just a deep dive and reading a lot on him. And it's just really sad. I think he's 60. He wasn't terribly old. He was immobile though, I believe, right? He couldn't.
He was paralyzed. Was he a former nurse too?
He was not a former nurse.
That was the other guy who got out, right?
Yeah, there was.
Okay.
Yeah, there's sort of like another obese gentleman who had been a nurse and was also at the hospital, and his rescue kind of showed that it could be done. Could be done. Yeah. But Emmett Everett, a different path was taken with him, and his body was found after the storm with these drugs that the health providers had injected, and that the series takes you through how that ended up happening, but you learn about him.
Oh, right. I did think of the person to hate in this, not really a person, more of an entity, and it's the big hospital corporations. Who did they ever pay any kind of penalty? Did Emmett's family ever able to sue and get anything from Tenet Health or Life Care?
Yeah. So his family and others, there was actually a class action civil suit against the various entities that owned, this hospital. And it went up and down in the courts and took many, many years to resolve. Ultimately, there was a settlement with no admission of any wrongdoing.
Of course.
And people got a little bit of money. I think the families of the patients who died got more. Even the doctor at the center of the accusations took a cut as well of the settlement funds because she was entitled. And that family also filed civil lawsuit, civil complaint, forget the words. Like you said, Louisiana has a different system than most of America's states. It's based on French law, apparently. But in any case, they filed a civil complaint against this doctor who we were talking about, as well as some others. And there were settlements, as I understand it. But as part of that, there were these hush-hush clauses. And so the families were not, like at some point, the families who did settle with the providers or with the hospital had to agree never to basically talk about it again.
Which complicates the reporting, because at least with a criminal charge, when someone is, there's double jeopardy. When you're cleared forever. But with a civil case, you can appeal, you can file under another. It just complicates the reporting to no end. But one of the things you said really struck me. One of the first investigations I ever did, and it was a very small one, was at Michigan State when I just simply did a story that said the disabilities office is on the 4th floor of the Communication Arts Building. And I called the university's building management guy and I said, what happens to those people if they're up there at a meeting and there's a fire and they shut down the elevators? And he said, I just never thought of that. I mean, so it was like a half-hour investigation, but these things happen all the time. But at the same time, and I think one of the things that is so compelling about the series is, let's say they had everybody on the ground floor and then it floods and now you have to move them to the top floor so they can get to the helicopter. You know, when these disasters happen, there's almost whatever you do, it can be the wrong decision. And I don't know if through your research and your experience, you've come up with in your own mind what would be a reasonable solution to where do we put people when the danger could be coming from below, could be coming from above. I mean, oh my God, who's going to solve that?
Well, it's such an excellent question. I love how you conceptualized that and framed it. And that's also sounds like a great.
You mean around himself?
What's that?
You mean framed around himself? Yeah, that was great. He's never done that before. He stepped out. He stepped out there. Yeah.
Sean gets a black armband.
So people who can't navigate stairs should have a way to get down in an emergency, regardless of the disability office. But that is a prime example. And I saw there was a student who was doing some activism at one of the campuses. Now I forget which, to try to ensure that there are like chairs that can help people get down these steps, no matter, why they might be in the building. Anyways, it's a whole very, very important topic. And I hope somebody who listens to this will take it forward. And I intend to try to keep raising awareness about that. But getting back to your question, which is a very good one, I think it highlights something which is really my takeaway after years of working in disasters, writing about disasters, being a responder myself. And it's two things. One is that we can be more prepared. We can certainly be more prepared. And those hospitals in New Orleans, they took a lot of steps. So now, I was just kind of chuckling to myself, but not with mirth, when I saw some hospital in Florida recently sort of like saying, well, we don't have water. That's not our fault. That's the city's fault. But the hospitals in New Orleans, some of them, including this one, after Katrina, they built wells, like dug a well so that they will have water if the city water goes out. Like, there are things that you can do to be more prepared if you're in a type of a situation where, like a coastal storm area where this is likely to happen. Same with, building generator systems that are much more hardened for these types of disasters that are the most common for your area. And in each area, of course, there are different hazards that pose the greatest threat of the rare but very foreseeable kinds of catastrophes. So that's one thing, is that we can be doing a heck of a lot more. And it's all about, again, like triage, and where do we want to put our resources? Where do we want our community to put their resources? How much do we want our hospitals to spend on protecting us and our loved ones in case there's a power outage, which in Michigan could happen in a winter storm, for example? So that's one thing, is yes, more needs to be done, more can be done. A lot of these problems can be mitigated, prevented. But the second piece gets at something you point to, which is that there is no perfect preparedness. It's like in the military, those who've served, that you prepare for battles, and then there can be surprises. And the scenario that you drill for will likely not be exactly what you're going to meet. So you also have to prepare to be flexible and to make good decisions in a crisis. And so there's that personal piece. And the reason why the series and the book looks at individual decisions is that any of us could be in a situation where our workplace, our locality has not invested enough in preparedness or has done the wrong kinds of things. And it becomes like we become the first responders, the de facto first responders, because the real first responders are overwhelmed. And we all have to prepare to do that. You can take a class and learn how to stop the bleed. And that way, if you come across a motor vehicle accident or a gunshot wound, you can help save a life. So there are things that we can do to improve our own preparedness. Having the tools to administer an antidote for people who take an opiate overdose, again, save a life. So it's all about preparing, helping, not only kind of insisting or campaigning for these larger issues to be dealt with and more to be invested, and demanding that of our private corporations or our public institutions, but also think about yourself, think about your family and your community, and what do you want to do to be more prepared.
Well, Sheri, you've put these issues before the public. I saw a forum you did where you said, and it was chilling. You're like, we have a ventilator shortage. What do we do if we have a 1918 style pandemic? And I had to check the date on this interview because I thought, oh shit, we did have a 1918 style pandemic and we didn't have enough ventilators. And why the hell weren't they listening to Dr. Fink, Pulitzer Prize winner, before 2019? How do you feel when these things are very plain to see? You've put them in the public domain, in print, very well read, very widely read, on TV now, and yet we seem to find ourselves on this treadmill where the reason why maybe Ian isn't as bad as Katrina is because we're just lucky, not because they read 5 days at Memorial. I mean, do you ever feel like you're just shouting into the fan?
Yeah, I mean, I can have some pretty, it can feel like, why does any of this matter sometimes? But I guess I would say a few things about that. I mean, first of all, it's very rare that a piece of journalism changes the whole world. It does happen occasionally, but, I think somebody very wise early on taught me that if that's your expectation when you go into journalism, you will be, cruelly disappointed and disillusioned and depressed. But and it is hard to see the same kinds of things happening. And I'm looking at Ukraine, and my first book was about a war hospital in Bosnia and war crimes and crimes against humanity and violations of medical neutrality. This concept that you do not attack a hospital in a war zone, that there's actually rules to war. So when you see those kinds of horrific things happening again, it can be very, like for journalists who write about them, or I suppose, people who are activists who campaign on these issues, it can be very disheartening to see that sometimes we don't learn or not enough is invested. But I do think that that a difference does get made, and but it's on a smaller level. And so I know of individual instances where, for example, somebody read the book. I remember this hurricane in Florida I was reporting on a few years back, and I always ask this question, like, was there anything that you did that helped when the disaster came? Like anything that your fire department invested in or your hospital invested in terms of preparedness that actually paid off. And this, I'll never forget this. I think she was like a director of a small emergency medical services, ambulance company out in this part of Florida. And she said, actually, we read your book, and there was a little bit of money for preparedness. And so we retrofitted our ambulances to be able to take bariatric patients, which is like obese, very obese patients. And then we ended up using them to get those people out of town who weren't mobile, who were at risk as the hurricane was coming. And so when you look at or somebody will come up to me at a conference and say, I went into, emergency response because I read your book and it made me passionate about helping to solve some of these problems. So I think that's where I take my, how I keep going in terms of finding any value in raising attention to these issues, is that it does make a difference in some people's lives. And that's just the way you have to look at it.
And you never know who's going to read it, because one of the big examples is the Great Influenza book. I'm going to forget his name. John Barry. John Barry, I think, wrote the Great Influenza.
Yes.
Am I close? He writes the book. President Bush reads it summer of 2005, which is interesting, right before Katrina. And then afterwards I think he just started devoting money to being prepared for a pandemic. So that book got in the president's hands. He makes a plan, and then a few years goes by and we decide, we don't need to spend money on that. And I know you're working on a COVID book. I don't know what aspect of it, but is it just as simple as it's going to be someone else's problem? We don't want to spend money on it now. Is that just too simple of a way to think about it?
Well, of course not. I mean, Well, that is what happens. Yeah. But no, I mean, I think you raised something, which is that preparedness is not like a one-time investment.
Yeah,
It is
yes.
it's just like if you were on a sports team. I know you guys like to talk about sports on this podcast, and it wouldn't be like, the team practices and buys some great equipment and then waits, until the game happens. You have to always be exercising. And that is very true of this preparedness stuff. I'll never forget the story from this famous flooding disaster that happened after Tropical Storm Allison. This was a few years before Katrina hit the Houston area. And there's this Texas Medical Center. It's very unique, but all these major hospitals, these fantastic hospitals in Houston are all in the same area of town because there was like some land that was given for them. And apparently several of the hospitals connected below ground in some series of tunnels. And so they had invested in a flood door system. But by the time that tropical storm came and they had flooding, nobody remembered that this system existed, and they left it open. And the place flooded, and all these patients had to be evacuated, and they lost power. So I think it's mentioned in the book, in 5 Days at Memorial, the book. But it just gets that idea across that you don't just like invest in stuff and go away. It is a process, and it has to be, invested in and practiced. And those little drills that annoy all of us, the fire drills and whatnot, there's a purpose for them so that we develop that muscle memory so that when the crisis happens and we're scared or we're exhausted, that we react in ways that will help save our lives. And I'll also say it's just a question of triage, right? Like we all have our day-to-day priorities. And so maybe it's not so surprising that money doesn't always get invested in these kinds of like scenarios that we know are rare. We know they're very possible. And so maybe we have, as a society, decided that we just want to throw the dice and make that gamble. But as we see, and the purpose of telling these stories is to sort of show what happens, what the consequences are of not preparing more.
Well, that's one of the things I always worry about is this a matter of acceptable risk, where if you have a line item in your budget, for our survivalist listeners, you do have to check the date on that peanut butter and the water and the batteries that are in your basement and your shelter, because doing it once doesn't necessarily protect you forever. For folks who have been affected by the flood here in Detroit, we talk a lot about backflow preventers. Well, if those aren't serviced on a regular basis, they can freeze up, and when they're supposed to do their stuff, they may not be functioning. So you can't just do it once and say, we're done. But I wonder if there are points where people say, you know what, we could spend $1 billion on this and save a few lives, or we could spend $1 billion and build a bunch of schools and then improve 1,000. Who makes these decisions? And I think what ends up happening is they get kicked down the road.
Yeah, the point is that it shouldn't be an either or. And so there is a sort of foundational notion in preparedness, which is that the more functional your infrastructure is on a day-to-day basis, the better it's going to serve you in a crisis. And I think that's largely true. And then you can think of investments that could have a dual use, that could help you on a daily basis and also help you in a crisis. And one of the examples of that, I think NYU Hospital in New York City a few years ago went to some sort of a cogeneration power system that apparently this power plant makes them more efficient on a daily basis, reduces certain costs, but also supposedly will be more resilient if there is like a coastal storm that hits here. And we had in New York City, we had Hurricane Sandy a few years back that caused a massive disruption in our medical infrastructure as well as city infrastructure. So those kinds of investments that benefit you on a daily basis can also help you in disasters. So to me, if I were, making some decisions, that's where I would go. And truly, like you said, if you're stockpiling on a personal basis, you want to rotate those things out. So you eat your peanut butter before it expires, but put the new one down in the shelter or whatnot. So there are ways to rotate stockpiles so that they're always fresh. And you can't just leave them. Yeah, and I remember at the start of this pandemic, when our health workers were finding their N95 boxes, and a friend of mine was working at a hospital in Los Angeles, and he kept putting the mask on and the elastic would break, and putting the mask on and the elastic would break. And you find, I had also saved some from 2015 and 2014 going to West Africa during the Ebola crisis, and as a journalist, and I had some masks, and sure enough, if you don't rotate them out in a few years, the elastic may not be. Yeah, this is why we have expiration dates on some of these things.
Yeah.
So that's important.
And don't leave it in the sun. Sheri, I want to talk before we let you go about your role as a producer. I noticed you didn't get a writing credit, but it seems to be very true to the book and to your story that you told. As a producer, I mean, we see executive produce, and that tends to be almost like an honorific or something. But what is your role as a producer, and how much authority did you have over what we were going to see on the screen? Because I think most authors are just so happy to get a deal. Like, you're going to make my movie, great. And they say, holy, I mean, Elmore Leonard, was legendary how many books he had that got turned into movies where he said, I had nothing to do with that. Take my name off it. We just was miserable. But you seem to have had, it seems, a uniquely influential role in what we're seeing without actually writing it.
Well, first, I don't know how to write for TV. I suppose it's something I could learn. And I have to say, some authors, I think more and more, are taking executive producer roles and learning to write for TV or movies. So that is something we're seeing more. There seems to be more openness to that, which is great. In this case, I had no power. I think you said power, but what I had were just some, honestly, terrific people to work with. And so, first of all, they were committed to basing the series on the book, and they kept that commitment. It is, very much based on the book and follows the book structure, even in that, in the hospital and then after the
right.
Hospital structure. And as for me, I think it was just about, how much I wanted to be involved. And so I was able to not only work with the departments I mentioned, but also give feedback on scripts, work with the actors who might be curious about certain things. And it was also just fascinating. I visited set a couple of times in New Orleans and in Toronto, where it was shot in both places. And I just felt like my input was really welcomed. Those creative decisions were not mine. And I'm certain there were ideas that I had that were not taken, but I always felt like at least my feedback was listened to. And I think that's, very much what you can hope for. So I had a good experience, but it's not my product. It's definitely Carlton Cuse and John Ridley. This is their baby.
And there's one featurette I saw with you and Carlton where you're on set, felt like it was the hospital. That just the attention to detail was amazing. Were you ever on set when they did the exterior flood shots? Because I don't know how they did that, but it looked like because there was a lot of real footage too mixed in, which I just love, real news footage, makes it look even more authentic. But were you there when they did the exterior flood shots?
I got to see the sets, and the flood shots were done, and actually people who are interested can go. There are a series of behind the scenes videos that were released, they're on the page. If you go to the website for each episode, you can see the behind the scenes for that episode. And also, if you wait past all the credits, including the foreign language translations, it'll pop up and you can watch it. And there's one or two of them. If you're interested in how this stuff gets made, which is fascinating, especially with a production like this with Apple TV Plus. It does have the Plus, giving so many resources for this. So they built I couldn't tell if it sometimes said a 2 million gallon or a 2 million liter water tank in Toronto, Ontario. That is apparently the biggest water tank ever used in filming in that province in Canada. And so they actually put the actors, in that water, which Carlton, and I've listened to him talk about this, and John, they felt was an important aspect of the integrity of the experience. And so, so like part of what you're seeing may be with virtual effects, but a lot of the actual sets were built. The exterior of the hospital was built, and then this huge water tank that they filmed in. So I wasn't there during the water tank filming, but you can find photos and videos of that online. It's really cool. And I think there's even a short, I don't know if it's a behind the scenes or if you can like find it on social media, but the set designer, I think, like walks you through how some of the visual effects were done. And it's so interesting.
It is a visually stunning production. And just even in the introduction, when you see the roof come off the Superdome, something's happening. I mean, that this is going to be bad. And one of the things that when I watched it was the first episode is staggeringly scary, and then everything's calm. And you're like, well, we got like 6 or 7 more episodes to go. And then pretty soon you're like, oh, we're just getting warmed up. Okay, I got it. I mean, it's an outstanding production based on a fantastic book by a reporter who I think, I don't know if it's fair to say this, was almost born to write this, because if you spent 6 years doing the reporting, you came to that with a foundation that was laid through, 10 or 12 years of medical school and your experiences working in overseas war zone and triage hospitals. I don't know anybody else who could have done this in less than a lifetime. I mean, maybe Robert Moses could have pulled it off when he finally finishes the Lyndon Baines Johnson opus. But I mean, it's terrific, and we've really appreciated you making so much time for us. And I'm really glad that this was made into a broadcast production, that it was done with someone who took the care, the consultation, and who gave it the time that it really deserves, so that the story can be told without caricatures. I mean, composite characters is one thing, but caricatures, we don't really need those. And I don't know at this point, and I have a couple episodes to go, how I'm going to feel about everybody by the time it's over. I mean,
you might change your opinion a few times. Thank you. Well, that is lavish praise, especially for someone with the family history that we have.
As a defendant,
I owe it all to my dad. Dad is listening, so a lot of it, anyways.
He told me you owe it all to him. By the way, he mentioned that. He said she's nothing without me.
But kudos right back to you for the incredible work that you've done over the years. I know my dad has been very proud to represent you. And so, yeah, it's really nice to be on this with somebody who understands the challenges of the type of journalism that we do.
Well, I am a raisin in the sun here. There's no comparing my work to what you've done, but I'll take it, and then I'll remind Sean of it when we talk later.
And it's eligible, right, for next year's Emmys, correct? I mean, this wasn't because of when it aired, right? So could it be up for an Emmy?
I guess I don't know.
Oh yeah, just say yes. yes. I think it is. I think it aired late enough, so it's next year's, and that's the good thing about being a producer.
It wasn't this year, so yeah.
So
great.
Please buy the book, watch the show. You won't be disappointed. And I understand. I think it's very informal, but Apple TV Plus's next major project will be an adaptation of the Kwame Sutra. So look for that before you cancel your subscription, because you're going to want to stick around for that. And I believe copies of the Kwame Sutra are still available at Salvation Armies throughout the metro area. So
I just came across my copy this morning. But
in the garbage?
Just coincidentally.
It's a little hurtful that you don't take it everywhere you go. I mean,
I did take it. That's why it is here with me.
I'm told it can stop a bullet if you keep it in your pocket, but
it is. I think my book could stop a bigger bullet, being 600 pages. Yours is very thin.
Pamphlet,
much more quickly readable.
Yeah,
I would recommend that people get them both.
I hope
their library, of course.
I hope that neither one. I think mine has been banned by some Michigan libraries, but I think it may make a reference to drag queens. So
no, he's joking. Don't listen to him.
No, not yet.
It can't be banned if it's never made it in there.
Well, I hope no one will ever test our theory about whether it can stop a bullet, but if you got some time on your hands, watch the series, read the book.
Really good.
I have a feeling that whichever one you start with, you're going to want to transition to the other one because that's what I'm going to do. And I will just tell you before we go, in 2013, when my book was being shopped around and Sheri's was doing so good, I was like, I hate that Sheri Fink, but I've come around on that too. She's so successful. She's done such great stuff. And I'm doing a podcast in the basement.
With me.
With Sean.
Sean, yeah, exactly.
I mean, you have a podcast. I don't have a podcast, ML.
That's because you prepare for disasters. I just find myself in the middle of them, and then we run some commercials. You know, but at least I've got lots of fresh water. So, well,
Cheers.
thanks, Sheri. We look forward to your next book and whatever other endeavors you get into. And in the meantime, Herschel, I've got you on speed dial. So if I get in any trouble, I'll just hit number 1 on my phone.
I mean, he's not there. What do you expect him to respond?
No. I
Just
thought that's usually where Sean comes in and says something about Grammy suits.
No, I don't want to interrupt this praise. No, yeah, no, it's good for you.
No, it's
Okay. Well, let her enjoy her day then. Thank you, Sheri.
Yeah. Thanks, Sheri.
Emmett, I know
Nice
how
to
you
meet
feel.
you.
I know how you feel.
Really nice to meet you all. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sheri.
It was fun.
So this disaster was brought to you by Hall Financial, who can help you avoid a financial disaster by getting you a pretty good deal on a new mortgage or cash out refi
or debt consolidation, right?
If you want to buy a generator, maybe you want to take some cash out of your house to prepare for the next disaster.
If you have over $5,000 in credit card debt or you own a home, you got to call Hall Financial. See if they can help. Home equity is the most affordable resource to pay off high interest credit card debt, student loans, or even start that home renovation project you've been putting off. A free 5-minute mortgage review with Hall Financial is all it takes to see how much money you've gained in home equity. And in a lot of cases, you can even access money in 2 weeks or less. We all know they have over 5,000 5-star reviews. Hall Financial is Michigan's highest rated mortgage company. See if a cash out refinance makes sense for you right now. 866-CALL-HALL or click on the link on the website.
And if you have a financial disaster, well, you may feel like you're in the middle of one right now, but you don't have to wait for a helicopter. You don't have to wait for the National Guard or some good old boy on a fan boat. Luke Nowacki is the guy who can take you through these troubled waters to Valhalla.
Yeah, if you have one of those big decisions, you got to know how it's going to affect your current and future financial goals. So Luke's got a team at Pinnacle Wealth Strategies. He can help you out, planning for the future and even for today. Call Luke 248-663-4748 for a complimentary consultation to see if your plan aligns with your goals, whatever you're doing. You got to call Luke.
And when you call Luke, he'll make it all about you, sweetheart.
Securities and investment advisory services offered through Royal Alliance Associates Inc. Member FINRA SIPC. Royal Alliance Associates Inc. is separately owned, and other entities and/or marketing names, products, or services referenced here are independent of Royal Alliance Associates Inc.
Oh man, the geeks have inherited the earth.
Did I do that?
What a dork.
Does him wanting to play with us again mean that he's turning into a geek, or we're turning into cool guys?
I do want to say, by the way, for my money right now, Apple TV Plus is the best streaming service, which is funny because I used to dog them years ago, and then I got it and started watching it. I mean, so many shows, because I think I've talked about Severance a billion times.
Oh, yeah.
Blackbird.
Yeah, enough with the Severance.
I know.
You'll
I'm
be
a
getting
little
some
annoying.
Severance.
I'm a little annoying about
Knock
Severance.
it off. No, it's...
We Crashed. Loot is on there. Of course, a lot of people love Ted Lasso, the morning show, so...
When is Ted Lasso coming back? Is Wrexham going to steal Ted Lasso's audience?
Are you watching Welcome to Wrexham?
I am watching.
Really
I'm actually listening to it. I'm worried that I'm going to hit the Ryan Reynolds cuteness toxicity level at some point.
Yeah, that wears a little bit on me too. Ryan Reynolds is always on, but they do a really good job making it not about Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney.
So I don't know Rob McElhenney. I mean, I know about his show and all that, but
you do know Ryan Reynolds. Do you guys hang out?
And Rob McElhenney.
I cut him loose.
He also has a show on Apple TV Plus.
Yeah, he's too small.
Too small for me.
He's not handsome enough.
Well,
He's not you.
Let's just say you got to go to a tiebreaker.
He's certainly no Mark.
Yeah. No. There's only one Mark.
I would say HBO Max is kind of right there with.
They're there
with.
But honestly,
I'm not as interested in as much stuff that they have. I mean, I like Succession, but the other stuff doesn't really do it.
But you don't like Game of Thrones.
Station 11.
Yeah, I'm not into dragons and 8-sided dice.
Just
and all
finished.
that.
Wait. I got
Industry. That's
industry. Yeah, I've heard a lot of you. You told we were talking about
really
that
good.
too. Wait a sec. You don't watch Game of Thrones because of dragons? Is that why? What do you
No,
think?
I'm just not.
Do you think it's childish?
No, I don't.
I haven't watched it either, Mike. I'm with you.
Yeah,
Why?
I don't want to get sucked
know.
into some big episodic fantasy thing. Now, I am watching Shetland on, which I guess I get through BritBox, which is
Wait,
great.
What season are you in?
Well, I'm waiting for episode 4 of season 7 to come
Oh, so
out.
you've finished the all first 6 seasons?
Twice.
Shetland is one of my favorite shows.
You mean Shetland?
Yeah.
Shetland.
Yeah, everyone
it's
loves
great.
it.
Douglas Henshaw. No,
He's leaving the series.
He's great. We just stumbled across, I shouldn't say stumbled, because somebody said, here's a low-key great show that nobody talked about for the last 15 years called Halt and Catch Fire.
Yeah, really good show.
It's really compelling.
Especially if you're nerdy.
It's really compelling.
No, it's really good.
I mean,
Game of Thrones
you
is
never
better.
said anything about that before.
Because I watched so much television.
Dude,
and
that's a gem.
I'm glad you brought up the point, ML, about it being an 8-part series, 5 days at Memorial instead of a movie. Because I much prefer that, that episodic thing.
More praise for ML.
Most people do.
Well, it's about time you did.
I mean, that's kind of where we're at, and it's so good.
No, they're like movies, and you can watch them in your home. And
The way they're done, the quality, the acting, the writing, right?
Yeah, so I've for years no cable, didn't binge watch any of this stuff.
And now you're in season 7 of Shetland.
For the second time, yeah, but the second time I've watched it, waiting for 7 to come out, and I'm waiting for the next couple of seasons of Endeavour to come out.
And it's Scottish.
But that's right. That's right. And it's not too far
Which is
from
good for you.
Aberdeenshire, where the Elrics hail from. But
so is Game of Thrones.
I know, but see, the thing is, I like the smaller shows where it's more about the characters and the story, and I don't need the pyrotechnics.
Then you'll love Halt and Catch Fire.
But that's what I was kind of thinking you were going with the dragons and whatnot. That's the great thing about that show. So many characters, so many storylines.
Yeah.
And you don't know who might disappear. And I don't know. There's so many twists and turns. And I was a little down on House of Dragons, the new one that's out there. But oh my God, after like episode 3, it has gotten fantastic.
Well, I'm not against special effects.
It's a great story.
I like Star Wars, but Star Wars is just a Western. It's a real simple story, at least the original one.
Too simple.
The first one. Oh yeah, maybe, but I just like places where I think I might go and people I might run into and things I might see. The one thing I will say about all these shows that I like so much is, holy shit, these little towns are dangerous. Like if you see Wallander, which is about the smallest city on the tip of Sweden, everybody gets murdered. There's like 20,000 people in this town and half of them have been murdered.
The Shetland,
Same with Shetland.
You got to get there by a 10-hour ferry or whatever. Or
you're going to be killed immediately.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 22,000 people. They have to end the show because the population is going to be decimated by the time they get to Jimmy Perez. And I don't know if Tasha's
Jimmy
still
Perez,
around.
by the way, is Douglas Henshaw. By the way, his partner, his sometimes roommate, his roomie.
I love him.
He's Scottish too. What's his name?
It's not Declan, but I know he's Duncan.
Oh,
Duncan.
No, but the actor's name. He's in a lot of good.
Ronson or Mark.
Yeah, he's in a lot of good stuff too.
He's terrific too. He's a lovable rogue, but just to come back to this 8-part treatment, one of the things that I do like about watching TV now is that I feel like I'm reading a book.
Yeah.
Each episode is a chapter, and the problem is now I'm not reading as many books, which drives me crazy. But the story,
it's the same thing.
The story does get told, and if it gets told in a way that's compelling, the good thing about it is the characters are so good that if it was based on a book like Game of Thrones was, and you exhaust the source material, you can then build upon it because you now have this universe and these situations and these characters and this creative team where they can take in a whole new direction, as they have with Shetland and some of these other ones where they ran out of books, but people love it, so they give them more and I just think
it's great character development. It is, and the acting. Just real quickly, Mark Menard's his name, who plays your Jimmy Perez's pal in Shetland. He's in a show called Guilt, which is kind of quirky and fun. You guys might like that. And then also Catastrophe, which is more of a comedy. That's another one. And then
like 8 Days of Memorial.
And then Unforgotten. So those are just
hit
some
of the summer.
if you're a Britophile like my man over here is, there's some things to check out.
Yeah, no, there's lots of good content out there. Of course, the best content is found here on the Red Shovel Network. And if you really want to watch compelling content, you can go to YouTube and subscribe to YouTube channel, ML Elric, which we wish you would do because you'll get an alert when we go live because we're not always as punctual as we are today.
We're never punctual.
Wait, are we wrapping it up already?
No. We're about to get to Geek of the Week.
Still waiting for Geek of the Week.
We're getting to Geek of the Week.
Oh.
I'm going to make it easy. Elon Musk. Now he's weighing in
so what's room
on
7609
Ukraine.
then?
I mean, Elon, just make your damn cars. Build your rocket ship. Make those batteries at the gig factory. Enough of Elon. I don't need Elon Musk to try and solve all the world's problems.
I'm with you. I'm not the biggest Elon fan. I think Tesla,
He didn't rescue those kids.
I think Tesla.
I think that's coming out on Apple Plus too, by the way.
There is a move. There is a series.
Kids who were trapped underwater.
Yeah, which I don't want. What do I care about that story? It's weird.
I think it's called 13 Days in a Cave We'll Never Forget. It's sort of a play on 5 Days at Memorial there.
Remember they gave all those kids Xanax too to get them out of the cave?
And so there's a euthanasia angle?
Well,
Apple TV Plus is in a rut.
I don't know if they got their parental consent from the kids trapped in the cave to give them.
And there's a flood, and they're not prepared. Holy crap! This is a network built on a single premise. I hope Sheri's getting a piece of all this. Herschel, if you're still watching, you go get that cut for your daughter.
By the way, on the market today, though, Twitter shares were halted in trading because Elon decided that he will. I guess I will buy the company now. He's being forced to buy the company, and everyone's like, "Yay!" putting money into it.
Yeah, so he's
the guy
the geek.
messes. He messes with people's pocketbook and their and that's what drives me nuts.
It's a good Geek of the Week candidate. What about? Are we going to get an actual music song? No.
There's an all-night party in room 7609. And you can dance together all night if you've got the time.
Did you have a busy day today?
I do, but no, you didn't let me finish the sentence. I was going to say,
I know, because you're in a hurry.
No, an actual song this week.
You're in a hurry. Let's go.
Last week was kind of a fun
no more talking
experimental.
about Shetland or anything.
It was a fun experimental.
I've just figured out how to repopulate Shetland. Elon Musk.
There you go.
He can single-handedly offset the death rate due to homicide in the most northernest part
Another
of
great
Europe.
show, by the way, ahead of its time.
No, you're not allowed to talk about it anymore.
Homicide.
You're in a hurry.
No, I
homicide.
wanted to know.
Talk about homicide.
I wanted to know if we had a real song this week, or are we going to do some more experimental stuff?
No. We talked to Sheri, and this issue of life and death is kind of a Cain and Abel thing. It kind of brings us back to original sin. So I thought this would be a great time to check in with one of the greatest new wave bands of all time that we've never played on the show so far. So here's In Excess with Original Sin. And Sean, dream on, white boy.
You might know how